Hi, Roy.
Hi, Susie.
Good to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
I'm really excited about this episode today.
I am too.
Our guest today has a lot of really great insight.
I'm excited to hear what she has to bring to the table because I feel like she's going to be kind of loaded up with a lot of information.
Yeah. And you know, most families don't wake up one morning and decide today's the day that my loved one's going to go to assisted living, that they're going to move and into a new community.
So the lingering question, which is always there, is it safe for mom and dad to live on their own? And so today we're going to talk about the signs that it's time for assisted living.
Hi, everyone. Today we are joined by Dr. Teresa Young, who is a psychologist who specializes in aging, caregiving, and life transitions. Through her work at Generation Psychology, that's what it's called, right?
Psychological and consultation.
Generation Psychological Consultations. She helps individuals and families navigate the crazy, emotional, roller coastery, practical challenges that come with growing older. I wish I had known you 10 years ago.
I hear that a lot, actually.
I bet. It's really important work that you do. So thank you for being here and for sharing your time with our audience. Wondering if you could just start by telling us about your work and what you do.
Sure. So I am a licensed psychologist, and I do specialize in working with older adults, mostly just around different adjustment to aging issues, whether that's a medical illness or retirement, different life transitions that they might experience. And then I also see folks with chronic health conditions, folks with acquired disability. So maybe they've had a stroke or an amputation, as well as their caregivers. So I will see folks individually sometimes, and then other times we find that it's better to work with couples or with entire families.
Yeah, like a little bit of like collaborative therapy with them, like you would a couple or a family or that's really great. So what made you decide to work in this space?
Sure. It was actually during my training. I was training at the VA, and I had a couple of rotations with older adults there. And I just I really enjoyed working with older adult veterans. They have such a rich history, and they have a lot of different complex needs. And so that kind of steered me in that direction. And then through various other clinical experiences in physical medicine and rehab, I just kind of developed this little niche of working with older adults.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely needed.
Absolutely. Our baby boomers are going to be one of the biggest populations of aging adults right now. So it is exploding.
One of the things that we really want to talk about with you is are the signs that families often miss. And I imagine in your line of work with the community that you work with, that people come to you often like when they are in a crisis point, right? When they've hit that really difficult stage, and you've got to probably undo some things, I imagine, before you move forward with them. So can you share in your experience, like what are some of the early signs that people often miss when they're thinking about their loved ones who are living alone and they're worried about them and have to think about making some kind of a transition? What are some of those early signs?
Sure. I think not keeping up with bodily hygiene is probably a big one. You know, sometimes folks get into a routine and maybe they stop by on like Sunday afternoon, and their aging relative will shower and seem really put together that day. But then maybe they have to spontaneously stop by a couple of days later, and that person is still wearing that shirt, and maybe it's soiled with food or something on it, and it's clear that they haven't bathed or changed clothes in a couple of days. That can be an early warning sign. Certainly falls, that's a big one. Even, I know we mentioned kind of people who are aging alone, but sometimes even spouses will sort of cover for one another too.
Yeah, or
and
maybe even overlook things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they might pull aside their adult child and say, oh, I hear this a lot. Oh, your father fell the other day and it took 45 minutes for me to get him up. I was so scared. But he didn't want us to call anybody or bother you. But just so you know.
Yeah.
But sometimes I would think they would hide that too if someone fell. Like, let's not tell the kids anything happened. We don't want anybody to know. So I'm sure you come across that a lot.
There is a little bit of collusion around that. The older they get, and if one of them is having more decline, it's harder to keep that under wraps. But it does happen where it's sort of a like, well, we don't want to imply that we can't do this on our own still. And so let's try to hide or conceal it as much as we can.
Right, because that would seem like they're working as a team because they don't want to go anywhere.
Yes.
Because they know that like they could put us somewhere. I mean, so they're going to try to work together to
just
avoid
they don't
anything
want to
like
be needy too.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it.
I would think it would almost be like a little bit of neediness and like a little bit of fear behind it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think sometimes, some of these folks have been married for 70 years, 80 years. And so it is always sad to see folks separated, so if one person has to go to a different level of care or something like that, that can be really heartbreaking. And so the idea is we're just going to kind of try to stick together here and maintain the house. But there are obvious cracks in that, and usually that happens through falls or poor hygiene.
Yeah.
Right.
Medication mismanagement is another one. Yeah.
Well, and I know for some people, like it might be easy to dismiss a sign as something less serious by thinking, oh, well, that's just part of getting old, and part of aging. So what would you say about some of those hesitations, and do you have like examples of questions that you would suggest that someone ask of their loved ones? Like, what are some ways to like gently with care enter into those conversations as a family?
That's a really good point. I hear a lot especially from retirees, like, well, I don't need to know what day of the week it is anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of hiding disorientation to time.
Yeah.
And so I might say, okay, well, you know what? If something happened to you, I would really want to know where your medications are. Do you think you could just show me in case,
Oh, that's really
something were to happen? Or can you tell me a little bit about your medications and how you organize them? You're taking 5 different things and they have to be taken at different times of the day. So how do you manage all of that? And sometimes that could be as simple as getting a pill box to problem solve that. But other times with medication mismanagement or something like that, it's you took it and then you went and did a few things and then you can't remember if you took it again. You don't know what day it is, so you take it again.
And that causes a lot of problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've done that?
I've done that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we may have to have a conversation about Suzie.
We could all use more help, really. But I think just asking them to explain it to you.
Yeah.
So having an approach of curiosity,
we hear that a lot on this podcast.
Good.
We hear the necessity, the importance of curiosity a lot. And I think that's worth underscoring.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to get into a sort of a punishing or shaming voice about it because it is anxiety provoking if you think about someone who's not taking good care of themselves and the implications of that. But I think kind of tempering that part of yourself and really trying to find out more about how do they navigate their day and problem solve.
I think one of the reasons why too, as far as like not coming in with a shaming voice for the caregiver, often, at least my experience was efficiency. I was always trying to be efficient because I had kids to take care of, I had other things to do, and I needed to just make sure she was good and had what she needed. And so I think slowing down probably is helpful for the caregiver and the loved one.
Yes, absolutely. Kind of taking a deep breath before you walk in the door and just trying to stay in the moment with that person.
Yeah, that's good.
Can you share a story about a family that maybe have waited too long because they were hoping things would turn around and get better?
Sure. I think, and this will probably come up a few times, but sometimes I've seen quite a few times where someone has just not been taking very good care of themselves. They're mismanaging diabetes. They don't have somebody coming in and checking out their pill box and things like that. And then they end up in the hospital. And one of the points that I really try to make with families is that when you end up in the hospital and you're going from the hospital to a facility, your choices are more limited because it's more emergent at that point. And so you don't get to be on a wait list and you don't get to decide and go and tour places. It's usually you maybe get a couple of places that have beds available to you.
I'm curious then in that situation, like, do you have something in mind, a family in mind that happened to? Because I'm wondering, were you caring for that family before that happened, and or was it after something like that happened that they came to you? And I'm also curious, like, who's the first phone call? Who do you hear from first? Is it the caregiver or the person who needs the care?
It's usually the caregiver. Yeah, very rarely do I see the care recipient wanting to do that. Sometimes they do. I'm thinking of a couple of people who had a lot of insight into their condition and said, I realize how burdensome this is to my family, and I do want to make that easier on them. And they're more open to going. I have worked with a few families that are enthusiastic about heading into assisted living. They love the idea of having additional transportation or all of their activities on one location. That does usually take some general family coaxing, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, my aunt and uncle, they just moved into assisted living a few months ago, but my uncle was falling a lot, and my aunt has health conditions, all kinds of stuff going on, congested heart and everything, and or congestive heart, and so but they didn't want to go anywhere. They just wanted to stay home, and it took my cousins to talk to them, and they finally said, I think there was something happened to my aunt. She had to go to the hospital, like what you were just talking about. And they were like, we have to do it now. And so they did. And they absolutely love it. They absolutely love being in assisted living, and they're having so much fun. And we never thought that would happen. So they never thought that would happen. And so, I mean, I talked to my aunt the other day, and she was like, your mom would have loved this. And we're just having the grand old time. We all made these new friends and everything. So sometimes something may have to happen in order for that to, kind of kick the can down the road.
Yes.
So that was, and they're safer now. They're, and they're happier. They're, doing much better than being at home. Yeah. So I love hearing those stories, because I know you could probably have a lot of stories where that's not always the case.
Yeah. I'm thinking, as you were saying that, I was thinking of a patient of mine who had Parkinson's disease, and it was advancing. And so they were having more falls. And I think the bathroom is a kind of a danger zone for falls. And so it was the family was sort of debating between, like, okay, do we do adult diapers, or do we let them fall? And that kind of toss up started a conversation about maybe if you went to assisted living and there was somebody available who could help them go to the restroom, that would preserve their dignity in both directions, I think.
Yeah.
Well, your story is awesome. That it worked out really great for your aunt and uncle and the people that that are enthusiastic about going to assisted living. What about when someone is real adamant about staying home? Like, I'll be fine. I can take care of myself, and it's no big deal. How do you know when it's really time to push, and how would you recommend that?
Sure. I think that, we can talk about kind of the more extreme end of that, which would be a call to adult protective services.
Oh, gosh. That was not on my radar.
Yeah,
no.
that is an option sometimes. I've only had to do that a few times.
Okay.
But again, I don't that's not a go-to when I'm working with families, because obviously that can be incredibly disruptive to the relationship that you have with your loved one. The step down from that might be pursuing conservatorship. So And it might be helpful to know that there's a condition called anosognosia, which is a neurological condition where the person has diminished insight and awareness into...
Say that one more time.
Anosognosia.
Anosognosia.
Why is it called that? I mean,
I
seriously.
do not know. I should know that, but...
Yeah.
Should be something easier.
Yeah, it's easier to say, certainly. Yeah, but it reflects this kind of lack of awareness of their diminished abilities.
How is it diagnosed?
It's not actually it's not the same kind of diagnosis as something like Alzheimer's disease. It's it's a syndrome within Alzheimer's disease. But it could also happen if you have right parietal damage after a stroke or a traumatic brain injury. Even certain people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder have a lack of insight or awareness into how bad things really are. And so sometimes it is just too difficult to explain to the loved one. Like they know they might say, oh, I have Alzheimer's. But as you're trying to say, and therefore you shouldn't drive, or therefore you can't remember to take your medicine. And they'll say, oh, no, I can. No, it's fine.
And so what about that? I mean, that, that was a little shocking. I was What about one level under that extreme? If it's just general stubbornness and pride.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we run into quite a bit. In that case, I think just more family discussions. And that's where I find my role to be really helpful, because with families, they're reacting to decades and decades of patterns and knowledge of each other. And so when I'm here, I can help slow things down and say, wait a second, you just said this. I want to know what that means. And then maybe if there are concerns, we can actually problem solve those.
Yeah, and how you can help them understand each other a little bit more.
Yes.
That's really great.
Yes, absolutely.
That's really great.
I will often frame it in terms of push-pull factors. So there are things like falls and hospitalizations or even like rising property taxes or something like that will push people out of their homes.
We've seen a lot of that around here.
Yeah, certainly. And so that will actually cause a more difficult time adjusting to a new place. Whereas if there are pull factors, imagine if you didn't have to make dinner every single night. What do you think you would do with your time? Or what if you didn't have to mow the lawn? Or what if you didn't have to arrange a ride to go meet up with your friends because they're all downstairs doing a music class together?
What if you could get your hair and nails done every week?
Hey.
That was the selling point for my mom.
That'd be a selling point for me, for sure.
I would think, though, that letting go, I mean, we do that in general, but letting go of our patterns kind of our entire lives, just from everything, that's the hardest thing to let go of. So because we don't want to, it's that sense of just, well, there goes all my control, it's over now. So it's just getting over that threshold.
Exactly. Well, and helping people realize that like you actually already have lost control. All of the reasons for staying home are you don't actually do anymore.
Yeah, but they don't realize that those falls and forgetting to take medication, like they don't think about that stuff. It's just the fact that they're in the house. It's their home and they have certain ways to go.
I love the push-pull idea. I love that, thinking about it that way, because I think we go into this conversation often with a lot of fear and anxiety and preconceived notions. And when you talk about push-pull and emphasizing more of the pull and what's compelling about going and joining an assisted living community and all the things that would maybe make their lives more delightful, I love that sort of reframing and not minimizing the hardship and the difficulty, but that's a really great way to put it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that wouldn't have worked for my dad, no matter what.
He just said nothing. There's nothing that makes me want to leave.
He was just set in stone. He's like, that's not happening. And I was like, well, okay. So, but yeah, it is. I mean, everything you just said was great. So that is a great way of approaching it. So I haven't heard of that. Did you hear that? Yeah, that was great. So when they arrive in the facility or in their assisted living, was there a point when they realized something specific wasn't the same anymore?
Yeah, I think there's kind of this moment of realizing that you can just enjoy yourself, actually. I'm thinking about a woman that I worked with who, now she was able to use a laundry service. And so all of this time that she spent folding laundry, which was taking longer and longer because she was getting older, and spending all of this time trying to prepare meals. And just, once she didn't have to do that anymore, she just felt a sense of relief that she could just enjoy, painting or going to a music class or something like that.
Yeah, they got rid of all the stresses.
Yeah.
So that would make things just be a lot lighter on them and just kind of relax and enjoy things. Yeah. I mean, the community itself and meeting the people and being around everyone, I mean, that's such a big relief right there because everyone's in the same boat. You're there to have a good time. You can go do painting, or you can just hang out in your room or whatever you want to do. So yeah, I would definitely see it as a big relief. I mean, you've talked about it many times about how much your mom loved getting her hair done or just doing all these, all these
playing
things.
Bingo, getting her hair done, getting her nails
and
done.
it took away from just being at home
Yeah.
and the stress on you and all that. So
once the decision's been made, we've decided that the best thing for our loved one is to transition them into assisted living. We've talked a little bit about how to approach them with curiosity and values and whatnot. Do you have anything that you would want to add to that approach? And then also, I know for me, it carried a tremendous amount of shame and guilt. So there's a lot there to talk about as well for the caregivers.
Absolutely. Kind of building off of that idea of curiosity, I think sometimes striking while the iron is hot. So if they are complaining about, the washer dryer not working or repairs around the house, or
what if you didn't have to do your laundry?
Yeah, exactly. Or gosh, this is the fourth caregiver you've had to get to know in the last 3 months. That's been pretty frustrating, hasn't it? So kind of building off of those moments, and then maybe asking something like, well, so hey, do you see yourself aging here? Do you want to live here forever? Or have you ever thought about downsizing or even going to assisted living? So just kind of exploring that with the person to get their baseline of, did you envision aging at home in this split level house that you fall down the stairs every day, that kind of thing. And getting their feedback and opinion about that. That's also a good opportunity to clear up some misconceptions too, because I think sometimes people think any facility is a nursing home.
Right.
Getting an opportunity to explain different levels of care and what would happen at assisted living versus an actual nursing facility is a good opportunity. And then with the shame and the guilt, I almost always recommend to caregivers to not promise that you won't encourage someone to go to either a nursing facility or an assisted living facility, because you just don't know what life is going to throw at you. And then I think with caregivers, there's a lot of shame of like, well, why couldn't I do this? And we're individual people, and even we struggle with taking care of ourselves all the time. Like nobody drinks enough water. Nobody exercises enough or eats all the healthiest food. And so when somebody is increasingly dependent on someone else for care, it makes sense that not just one person is going to be able to provide all of that.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not always like, okay, today we've decided that we're going to do assisted living. And so by next month, we're going to move in and it's going to be awesome. Like you have to go tour several of them, and there are a lot of great options and there are a lot of not so great options, and finding the right one and like throughout the whole process there's a lot of feelings involved, because there's like we mentioned, there's the shame and the guilt maybe, but there's just also just loss, right?
Yes.
So for the person that's moving, they might struggle with a fear of losing their independence, but there's the actual real loss of leaving your home or leaving your spouse of 70 years, as you mentioned earlier. And then for the I know for me, when my mom went to assisted living, it was a relief in so many ways, but it was also loss. Like, okay, so this is a different stage of life now, and it means different things. So what do you, how do you approach families with those kind of conversations?
Sure. I am a big fan of rituals. And so if there is, maybe you all have dinner one last night in the house, or maybe in your new house, you kind of do something to commemorate that. So I think that can be a helpful way to ease the transition. And I also remind people that it's okay to grieve loss. And the core components of grief are, anger and depression and denial too. So those are normal feelings to have at such a time. And so it's okay to, when you go to try to find something in your new bathroom cabinet, you are like, I used to know exactly where this was and now I don't. Or the setup in here is so different, and I don't like it, but maybe I could like it. That kind of thing.
Have you ever, sorry.
Go ahead.
Have you ever, you were talking about tours, and I remember doing one or two of those, but have you experienced when you're on a tour or given a tour or whatever the case is, families heard stories, this and that, of taking mom and dad or either one of them on a tour of assisted living facilities, everything, and they just say, nope, that's not going to happen. And they could be like awesome, and like tons of great things are going on or whatever, but just, that's it, not doing it. I'm out, like I'm staying home. And then you see like the caregivers, the kids just going, oh God, I mean, I'm sure that's come across, in your experience, but I would like to hear a little bit about that.
Oh, certainly. I have definitely had that experience where folks are like, this is really nice for somebody else. I mean, sometimes depending on where they're at with their own health issues, that might be a signal of, okay, maybe, we have a little bit of time to kick the can down the road but the next time something happens, I'm going to remember, Evergreen Village was really nice and we all really liked that place. So there's that. So maybe it is just that it's not really quite time yet.
Quite time, yeah.
But
would you approach that then? Would you approach that situation where it was like, okay, it's not time right now, but if you can tell me which ones that you like the most out of those, can you do like a grading system, like a 1 through 10 or something like that? So that gives your cues to be like, okay, so like you said, Evergreen got a 10, and so got this, and so got that. I'm like, all right, I'll stick with that one. Maybe like a year or so later.
It's a great way to reveal more values too.
Exactly.
So, or you could say, gosh, I know this other person who's looking, or maybe one of your friends. If you had to choose, which one do you think you would recommend to them? And
I heard Johnny's down at Evergreen now,
Exactly. I mean, in some ways it's kind of a classic sales technique to get them to talk about it. And
yeah, that's great.
And they'll sell it to themselves in a way.
Yeah. Because you're just planting seeds, for that adjustment and everything. So, yeah.
I think one of the hardest things I've noticed for people is that loss of independence. So how do you have any recommendations for family members who are trying to hear their loved ones out, or even for the person who's moving into the assisted living community or the senior living community? What are some ways to really honor those feelings and to be with them in those feelings and to care for them?
I think starting where they're at is a good way to approach it. So asking them, what areas of independence do you feel like you really have before you've moved in? What have you already lost because of transportation or neighbors or things like that? So how independently are you actually living? And then even just talking with the staff at the facility to talk about, this person actually does like to have dinner a little later. Is that possible? Can we save their plate until maybe 7 or 8 instead of like a usual dining time of 4:30 to 6 or something like that? So there are all sorts of subtle ways to establish greater independence. It's just a matter of asking.
Yeah.
That's good.
That is good.
Yeah. It's hard for us to admit that we need help. Why is it so hard for people, especially when they are aging?
because you work so hard to become independent.
Okay.
So much of your childhood and adolescence is built around this gift that you're going to get when you're between the ages of 18 and 25 of independence. And for a lot of people, that's hard fought. And so you get all of these wonderful milestones, and then you have to slowly watch them get taken away.
Right. One by one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly difficult to have to, give that up.
Yeah, you spend all these years building a whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like just ripping one page out of the book.
Yeah.
As you go along, you have to just let it all go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I had my soapbox about that is that we should see that as part of life too.
Right.
That it's the climax of life doesn't happen at 50, or 60 when you have your first grandchild or what have you, that the climax of life is the end of it. And so each part of the transition should be embraced.
Right.
And we're really...
That's a good thing to be on a soapbox about.
Yeah, right? We really are only, in that sense, temporarily abled.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, we don't have independence.
And sometimes asking for help is actually a sign of strength. It requires courage.
Yeah.
And it's a different way of being in those older years.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's hard. We hear a lot of advice around this topic where people really struggle. Like, for example, if I know that someone needs help, but they really struggle with asking for it or receiving help. Do you have any suggestions for families who that maybe are less common suggestions out there, but do you have any good suggestions for families who are trying to help their loved one, but experiencing a lot of resistance or don't want to overstep?
Sure, absolutely. I will often, for those family members, I will validate how awkward it is to be in a parentified role with your parent. Like, that's a real role challenge. And so sometimes just naming that and validating it is helpful to say, okay, yeah, I would never stand up to my parents the way I'm preparing to.
Right,
that's scary. And then I'm sure you've probably come across this, but I also think that when you ask for help, you're giving somebody the opportunity to help you, which is a gift in and of itself. A lot of people do want to be helpful. And so you're giving them the opportunity to do something that makes them feel good about themselves.
Yeah. Help me help you.
Yes, exactly. And we're all just feeling great about it.
Help me help you. That's
fantastic.
Really great.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you really want our audience to know?
I think it's important to just broach the conversation and to start having it. There's never going to be a right time. That's something that I hear a lot from adult children is that, well, once we hit after Halloween, it's not a good time because it's the holidays. Yeah. And then in January it's too cold. And then the kids have started sports and now it's summer and we're going on vacation. And so the idea that there's going to be a right time to have this series of conversations is inaccurate. They're getting started with the conversation and thinking of it as a series of dialogues, I think can really help instead of just one big crushing conversation during an emergency.
Right. That's really good.
I actually like that.
A
like
series of conversations.
Yeah. That's
Yes.
We could have said it in unison right there.
I know.
A series of conversation. Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of times when we're having these conversations, there's a sense of urgency, either because of the need medically or the efficiency that the caregiver might be needing for whatever reasons, I mean, a series of conversations and having the grace for that seems to be really important. Like it's a way to be kind to ourselves, is to know that this is not just one big conversation that has to come crashing down, that it can be a series of conversations that move us towards an agreement that would be really great. Yeah, that's awesome. Dr. Young, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us and giving us your time and your wisdom and your insight. I know our audience will really benefit from all of this.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I just want to say too, you have this real calm demeanor. And so with that and presenting your information to help caregivers, family members, push everything into, the present tense here to be like, we have to have these conversations about this. It just shows what you're so great at in sharing all this information. So thank you so much for all that you do and how many people that you've helped. So thank you for being here today.
How can people find out more about the work that you do? And you mentioned that you do some telehealth services as well, but I know for me, I really would have benefited from you. I mentioned that earlier. But to even know that there's a mental health practitioner that can actually step in and help us through these transitions is really important. So how can people find out more?
Sure. They are welcome to visit my website, which is generationspsych.com. I can be found on Psychology Today and the Center for Mental Health and Aging, which is out of Atlanta. So I'm a member of that as well.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
One thing that stayed with me in this conversation was when Dr. Young was talking about having the mini conversations and planting the seeds that caregivers, family members need to understand of like, you're just trying to get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
That really
resonated.
One
really big conversation.
No, because usually that's just going to be a blow up or like it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed when she was talking about that.
Yeah, that was really good. I really loved the framework of the push-pull, that there's something that pushes you towards that, but then there's also things that pull you towards it. So yes, there might be a tipping point or a crisis or something that really speaks to the fact that your loved one, it's time for them to go to assisted living. But then there's also the pull factor of like, it's time to go and enjoy life in a different way and to have more social life and to be able to be, have your needs met in a way that actually could make you feel like you're thriving instead of losing things all the time.
Exactly. And I think that's how you resonated so well with that, because you got to experience that with your mom.
Yeah. But I think this conversation often feels heavy and hard and negative.
Yeah.
Whereas the pull factor in that is there's just something to that of there's a new way to look at this and it can be really helpful.
There is. And she kind of chipped away at that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what was like a big thing you can take out of this conversation is that she made that something that was really difficult to talk about and be like, it doesn't have to be.
Right.
So there's a lot of good information in here today.
And so listeners, if you're in the middle of that kind of decision, you are not the only one. And we want to hear from you. So text us your story or your questions at 833-473-9898. We would love to hear from you.
And if this episode helped, please subscribe and leave a review.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
The views and opinions shared in this episode are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brookdale Senior Living. This content is for informational purposes only and isn't intended as financial or medical advice or an endorsement of any position or product discussed. Always talk to a qualified professional before making decisions about your health, finances, or the care or finances of a loved one based on something you've heard in this program. Brookdale is not responsible for the accuracy or completeness of the information shared.